We're back. Our guest is Ambassador Yoram Ettinger of Israel, now retired from the Foreign Service of his country. He is the executive director of a marvelous operation, Second Thoughts, U.S.-Israel initiative. He is a close observer and deeply knowledgeable expert on matters involving his own country's national security, but really that of the free world more generally, and it's always a privilege to have a chance to talk with him. Mr. Ambassador, we spoke in our first segment a bit about the unreliability of the Iranian regime and about the administration here in the United States' conduct in negotiating with it. I did want to ask you just about your thoughts on what it means for the world, not just for, the Constitution and the processes it commands internally here to the United States, that the UN Security Council goes first in considering this deal, not the Congress of the United States.
Well, it seems to me that there is a multi-implication of that process, none of which is favorable to the future of our world. First and foremost, the fact that the president considers the UN to have a role larger or more senior than that of Congress defies the U.S. Constitution. It also says something about Congress itself, because in recent years, Congress, both chambers, seem to have abdicated much of their muscle. According to the U.S. Constitution, the legislature is co-equal and co-determining, not a branch of government, not a backseat driver, whether it is on domestic issues or national security or international issues. The other implication has to do with the reliability of the U.S. as far as its allies throughout the world. We have already seen Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states stating publicly that they trust much less the U.S. than they did a few years ago.
Our guest is Ambassador Yoram Ettinger from Israel. He is joining us by phone from Jerusalem. He is commenting on what to make of this Iran deal. I'd like to turn from sort of the overview to some of the specifics and just get your informed thoughts as to what they portend, again, not just for your country, but also for the interests of freedom-loving people more generally, including those of the United States. And perhaps I could start with one of the things that emerged in the end game, and that was essentially a huge windfall that would be sent Iran's way in the form of something on the order of $150 billion. A guest on our program, Congressman Pete Roskam, last week said the equivalent of that for our economy, much larger, of course, would be $8 trillion. What is your perception, sir, of the implications of that windfall? What will be done with it?
Well, again, the scope of the windfall can be clarified when you realize that the release of the $150 billion in Iranian asset, that by itself means 37% of Iran's GDP. To that, you have to add roughly $60 billion annually from oil exports. To that, you have to add the multi-billion-dollar foreign investments, which have already been announced. Chinese and Europeans, you have to also add the relief of Iran from the military embargo. Namely, they will have access now to most advanced military systems. And common sense begs to ask, how come there is such an agreement which rewards rather than punish Iran, which emboldens them, in fact, turbocharges the conventional capabilities of the Ayatollahs before before they prove that they are moving towards a more moderate direction. Because the conclusion is obvious. They are not going to be punished for their behavior. They're going to be rewarded, and therefore they're not going to change. And that which they are not going to change targets mostly vital American interests. We have in place a most anti-American, apocalyptic type of education system in Iran. We're talking about weekly anti-American Friday sermons. We're talking about the annual holiday Death to America Day. We're talking about the world banker of anti-American Islamic terrorism, including a few hundred sleeper cells in the U.S. You're talking about Iran, which subverts and terrorizes every single pro-American Arab regime in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Jordan, Egypt, etc. We're talking about Iran, which is an intimate strategic partner of North Korea in the development of nuclear ballistic capabilities. We're talking about Iran, which is an intimate ally of Venezuela, which gets deeper and deeper into Mexico, which is already homeland security, and getting rewarded in an unprecedented manner before providing a most minuscule indication that they intend to moderate their ways. This, in my mind, is the most self-destruct agreement ever concluded by any American leader.
Yeah, it really is saying something that on all of these counts, as you've indicated, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, we got the short end of the stick, and that stick will be used, I think there's no question, to beat us. Let me ask you about one other aspect of this. The champions of this agreement are promoting it, at least in part, if not largely, as a great accomplishment for non-proliferation, that it will not only prevent Iran from getting the bomb, but it will somehow manage to restrain others from doing so. In your professional judgment, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, and a man who has both diplomatic and military experience, what in fact is the prospect for nuclear non-proliferation in the aftermath of this deal?
Well, if, and it's a big if the House of Saud is fast enough to acquire nuclear capabilities from Pakistan, then they will spare oblivion, because one of the first targets of Iran is to topple the House of Saud, which, as of the announcement of the agreement about a week ago, it's now rushing towards acquisition of nuclear capabilities. Turkey is vying for leadership of the Muslim world. They are not very happy to see their competitor for that role becoming a threshold nuclear power, and therefore Turkey will double up on its attempts. Egypt realizes that a threshold nuclear Iran constitutes a deadly threat, clear and present deadly threat to the regime of the generals in Egypt. Therefore, they will try to become nuclear.
In short, and we are out of time, Mr. Ambassador, this is going to be a great catalyst to proliferation, both in Iran and throughout the region, in ways that, again, will make that already very, very dangerous neighborhood vastly more so. We are grateful to you for your service to your country and to the free world more generally, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, and especially for our visits from time to time. I hope you'll come back to us again very soon, particularly as the debate hots up here in the United States over the Obama bomb deal. Keep up the good work, my friend, at the Second Thoughts Initiative and elsewhere, and we'll talk with you soon. We'll talk next with Patrick Poole, 2 segments with one of the country's preeminent counterterrorism experts right after this.